Well, all right, let's begin.
Three, two,
What
one,
if,
podcast.
but that's not.
I actually
All right,
think it's
so it's
extremely dangerous to ground our morality in stories. It can be like if or supernatural stories. If I don't kill my brother because I think God told me not to kill my brother, then I have, if someone told me that that's why they weren't going to kill their brother, I would have no faith in them as a person or friend. I would not want to be around that person. I would have like the second their belief changes, they might murder me. Um, if someone is not doing it, and if someone is not following their morality because of how it deeply affects them, their reward system, their incentive structure, is instead doing it just because of some belief in a supernatural being, I do not trust that person, and I do not think that is healthy for society. And I think it's extremely dangerous because the second they believe they were told to murder someone by God, they will.
I I think that's true. I mean, that seems fair to an extent.
Oh, I thought that was going to be controversial.
No, I mean, you're basically saying it's people believe things strongly, and those beliefs can change. It's like, okay,
To
so
base morality on beliefs.
to base
As
morality on
opposed to
feelings, do people's feelings change? I mean, it's this. You can make the same argument about a secular
No, but
morality.
our feelings are well evolved genetically to provide us with a functioning set of norms.
Our beliefs are well evolved.
no, people
Yes.
believe crazy things.
Well,
Your beliefs can change like that. I feel like your beliefs can change based on things very quickly. Your feelings of what you should and shouldn't do to another person deeply do not change like in an instant.
why do you?
This is nuance because you're right that our belief systems are well evolved to be well adapted, right? They're memes, but they are memes that are only useful because they reflect the underlying biological reality, which is more fundamental.
No, I disagree. Well, that's a different thing. Back to what Tyler was just
Yeah.
saying. Why do you think that beliefs are more mutable than feelings? Like, why? Seems like people are more apt to cling to their beliefs under certain conditions than they are to be pulled along by changing winds.
No, I don't think so because
Why?
beliefs like if I believe maybe we need to define these terms, but like if I could very easily have some belief and then like someone could tell me a fact that disproves it. And then I would no longer believe that if I'm, living up to what how I hope to update my beliefs. Your feelings your feelings respond to things in the world, but the way they respond, I don't think changes, especially sure feeling it can change, the more superficial the feeling, I think the easier it is for you to exert some kind of conscious control over how that feeling arises, in what situations and what you do about it. But for really deep feelings, like I should kill this person, I feel good when I kill this person, like I don't think that is going to change just because you learn some statistic or see some piece of evidence.
Yeah, but I think the same thing is true the deeper the belief is. The deeper the feeling is, the harder it is for it to be contravened by any fact that you're presented with. The deeper the belief is, the same thing. Maybe more, maybe less. But for example, people's feelings change all the time when they learn new facts. Like, for example, you don't have affection, let's say, for a person of the opposite sex that you're interested in courting. Then you learn something about that person, and suddenly feelings start to develop that weren't there before. And that can even be on a very deep level. Like you learn,
That's
wow.
that's the is, not the ought, right? That's just learning more
But
about the
but
context that
that's all
exists out in the world.
that's all we're talking about right now, because Tyler was saying your beliefs just change. They can just change. So one day you can believe just Allah is God, and then the next day you can believe Vishnu is God. So, but I'm saying that the other thing that's important for us to understand is that beliefs and feelings are intimately tied. So, like, how we believe certain things is informed by how we feel already about them.
We
And
should define the terms.
It's not even
I'm already getting confused.
it's not even clear which comes first. You might feel bad when you lie to someone, but that feeling might come from a pre-existent moral belief, or the moral belief might arise from the feeling you get after having done the lie. it's not even necessarily clear which comes first.
And this maybe comes back to the heart of the problem. I don't think morality is a belief about a set of facts.
I don't either.
Right. Oh, wait, that's news to me. I thought you thought there was an objective set of morals out there that is true.
That's different than what you said. You said morality is a belief about a set of facts.
Sorry, is it, well, okay, a true belief. JTB, justified true belief, is knowledge. So I don't think morality is a set of facts that you write down, right? I think morality, for the audience, the standard question here is morality objective or subjective? And what that objectivity means, independent of person. So for example, anything that is mutually agreed upon, regardless of the observer, is objective. Like 2 + 2 = 4, that's objective. I don't think there is an objective set of facts about what is right and what is wrong. Like, to say killing is wrong. I think you could say descriptively, most people think killing is wrong. And then if you mean something descriptive, there is a truth about that. But if you mean something more than that, it doesn't make sense to me. Because like, let's say I was a sociopath and I didn't feel motivated to not kill. There might be pragmatic concerns. If I kill, I could be put in jail. But if someone comes up to me and says, no, killing is wrong, like, you're not going to face any consequences, but you shouldn't kill. Well, if killing someone isn't going to have any bearing on reality and on how I feel, like, in what sense is it a fact? If it's not going to have any like bearing on how I feel after I kill someone, in what sense does it even mean to say killing is wrong?
So a few things. I don't think, I agree with you that morality isn't just like a set of facts you can write down. Like, isn't just that. I think there are moral principles you can write down that are objectively the right moral principles, but they don't exhaust, they could never exhaust all of the moral complexity that's involved in deciding what is right and what is wrong. But in making the decision to act one way or another, you're assuming that there is a right way. There is a way that's preferable to another way. There is
Those
a way.
Might be different things, though.
They might be, but at a minimum, we recognize in any case where we have to make a choice that it's not just like totally arbitrary in moral questions. It's not just like I could either lie or not lie. It's like you have to think through it. Like, should I lie or should I not lie? And so even the fact that there's a process you engage in, you're demonstrating. It's like, for example, the rise of science. When they first started doing scientific experiments, it's because they thought they would be able to discover something. Like, they weren't just like, oh, might as well just put this under this thing and see what happens. They were like, no, I think given what we know about this and this, we might be able to, we might be able to discover something true. And that's when anyone's involved in moral deliberation, that's what they're doing. They're saying, there's a point that I should reach. I'm not sure what it is yet, but it's there somewhere, and it's my duty to find it out, which assumes underneath it that you have a duty to act morally in some way or another.
I think that begs the question. Like, all this talk about rights and duties is just another word for what do I value. If someone has a right to do something, I'm just saying I value that they are able to do that. The planning about the future part, like, deliberating whether I should lie, largely has to do with context. It's thinking about, I don't know what's going to happen if I lie or don't lie. If I lie, maybe Tyler's going to have the wrong information and arrive, to dinner at the wrong time. Maybe he'll be hungry, and I don't like it when he's hungry because I have some more basic value about, like, Tyler not suffering and not suffering in general. So I think there's definitely deliberation, but that's just planning about apprehending what the state of the world would be given certain actions. Then how you actually determine what path to take, what sequence of actions is best, is entirely a question of values. And those values are not objective. They depend on culture. We have sociologists who study different cultures. Like, they are clearly, differ by culture. And if someone goes up to me and says, hey, you should follow this culture's values, I'm going to say, no, what possible reason could I have for doing that? They don't match my values. I won't feel better when doing them. You can't convince me of anything by saying there's some objective standard for morality and this culture's standards. So in what sense does it, like, that objective standard even exist if any standard you could put to me that doesn't agree with my internal feelings, it's not going to convince me to do anything.
That's irrelevant.
Yeah, I was with you until that last point.
No, like all values are, and this is actually something I think Jordan Peterson is good at articulating, is implication for behavior, right? It's given a set of actions and outcomes. Which do I prefer? That's all morality is. That's all values are. It's your reward function in, to use a machine learning or reinforcement learning phrase. It's utility function. It's a reward function. And all it is saying, like, given a set of outcomes, how do I rank those outcomes? And if something isn't going to, and so I can act to get those outcomes, right? And if someone coming up to me and telling me, this is objectively morally true or false, if that's going to have no implication on my behavior, right? If it's not going to convince me of anything, you telling me killing is objectively good, that's not going to convince me of anything, then in what sense is it a moral fact? Like, if it's not going, why should I add that to my ontology?
So I followed parts of it I didn't. But so so outcomes then. Outcomes also just are, whether an outcome is good or bad is just entirely subjective.
Whether a state of the world is good or bad is subjective. There is a common morality because of biological and cultural shared similarities.
Okay.
And in that sense, there is a descriptive truth. Like 99% of people think killing is bad. But there is no fact of the matter beyond that. There's no sense beyond that in which killing is objectively wrong.
So would you feel comfortable ever telling me I should not kill somebody who I've decided to kill?
There's plenty of practical reasons I might tell you that, right? And we are social beings, and so I could urge you to not kill someone by saying killing is wrong. Don't you think killing is wrong? But at the end of the day, if you don't truly deep down believe killing is wrong, that's like me saying killing is wrong doesn't mean anything.
So, but you're also conceding by that you don't really think killing is wrong either.
In any objective sense, because there is no objective sense other than descriptive. I believe
Right.
In the descriptive sense, it is wrong. I believe personally, I feel it is wrong. I believe these two things are usually in alignment, but there is no, like, we couldn't go and consult a text that says, killing is good. We couldn't one day find an oracle, or a computer that is all knowing, and it prints out killing is good. And we're like, oh, we were wrong the whole time, guys. Killing is good. This computer that knows everything told us killing is good. Like, that's not how it works. It's a value. It's not, again, the is-ought problem. It's not something that someone can convince you of just by telling you more information, right? Morality is what compels you to do certain things. And if something doesn't compel me to do something, it is not my value. And it is not true in any, and to say it is true doesn't add any more to the story than to say it is not my value.
I think we need to put the question to Tyler: what does it mean to have a morality, or to say killing is wrong? What does that mean?
To say that killing is wrong?
Mm-hmm. For killing to be wrong.
Say that one more time.
Or for killing to be wrong.
What does that mean?
Yeah. Why is killing wrong?
So it doesn't mean just one thing. That's the first thing to say. Because Jake, or not Jake necessarily, but commonly theistic kind of groundings of morality are critiqued on the basis of a parity, which is that God says it, so therefore it's wrong. It's not just wrong because God, quote unquote, says it's wrong. You notice that Jake has assumed that our biologies have produced in us a common set of values. One way
I wouldn't say it's an assumption.
Okay, well,
but I'll let you get away with the rest.
you have not demonstrated that that's what has led to the common value system emerging.
Others have, but
no, they have not.
Evolutionary psychology is a valid field that exists.
Yes, it exists as a field, but it continues to exist as a field because they're continuing to work this out. AKA, they haven't demonstrated the things that they're claiming they
just because we haven't demonstrated all of physics doesn't mean we've been physics.
No, but it also doesn't mean that you've demonstrated it. Like,
people.
That's
okay,
what
we should come back from this rabbit hole and go back down it later.
It's a valid point anyway. So what it means on the classical Christian position, what it means to do something wrong is to act in such a way that is not consonant with the nature of God. That's what it is to do something wrong, to say that something
is why killing is wrong, because it is not consonant with the nature of God.
Yes. That's how I would sum it up. And that's how in the tradition typically it's worked out. Things are wrong, things are right, to the extent which they do or do not align with the nature of God.
And it's irrelevant how a person feels. Like
well,
okay, here's a thought experiment.
Go ahead.
If God like came down and like said, I got it wrong the first time, killing is awesome. Killing is right. You should kill. Like, should you?
See, that thought experiment. It can't be entertained.
It's a paradox.
It's like can God make a rock so heavy he can't lift it?
No, but Tyler's kind of onto something in that, like, if you define God as all good, in which case you beg the question, because you already needed to have a notion of good to define him as all good, or it's an empirical matter and you're saying, like, I've seen God has demonstrated to me that he is all good, and so I have evidence that God is all good. In which case you have to provide the evidence.
No, this is the Euthyphro dilemma, and it just doesn't work because it assumes that good is a distinct thing from God.
Well, yeah, there are two distinct things here. Like,
no,
goodness and a super powerful being, all-knowing in the heavens that is determining our lives. There are two concepts here. You can't just say they're the same.
No, they're two concepts, but they're the same. On classical theism, goodness, true goodness, pure goodness is God. God is goodness.
You're just using linguistic gymnastics.
No.
It does feel a little bit like that.
I'm pretty good at it, though.
You are good at it.
I'm just kidding. I'm kidding. No, but that's important. Like, you might not like that.
He did define good to be things that God, like the concepts in the way that we. Hold on. The concepts in the way that we think of these things are distinct. Like they meet. Like when we say God, we don't mean the way you should act, and when we say good, we don't mean like necessarily this, just like the supernatural creator. But you can. I think it's valid to say good is just whatever God like would do or is, and therefore, but that's like the first. I think that means that the first horn of your dilemma is correct or is accurate, Jake. That like it's basically meaningless, and it's basically just like whatever God says. Like God is good, and that is it.
And this is what you were hinting at earlier, right? Like if God told you to murder people, then that would be by your definition good, which I think is just a completely garbage sense of like notion of morality. Like,
no, but that's not what I.
You said it doesn't make sense to say that God would do that, but I don't understand why. It's only because of what God has done in the past.
If good means anything, it is not simply godlike. Otherwise, that is like a useless definition of good.
Right? Because if we literally just said, if we like replaced good in our definition of morality with God, which because they're equal, we like we could be able to do, then it truly is whatever God says goes. Like, and just because it might not make sense for God the way we've understood him in the past to do a certain thing, I don't see why, and this could be my lack of understanding Christianity, it breaks the concept of a God for God to like say things that don't. I mean, is that it? That God is omniscient? So if God said something before, it's right, and then if God says something different in the future, like that just can't happen.
Well, yes, to an extent, all of the attributes play into it. So he's all knowing, so he couldn't change his mind. He's all powerful, so there's nothing he can't do, et cetera, et cetera. But this idea that it's based on what he's done is not quite right. And I don't see, this is probably just an impasse that will be at because we have such fundamental different understandings of reality. But when people in our secular culture think of what define good for me, they do what Jake does, which is, well, I feel a certain way sometimes, and when I feel good, that's how I know I've done something good. To me, that's no better than me saying that goodness is metaphysical. It's God in his pure essence. That's true goodness. That to me is much more robust than my feelings today.
But
No.
it's not really temporal.
Well,
it's not what?
It's not, I said temporal. I don't really know if that's the best word, but like, it's not about like whatever I happen to feel today is good. It's like what people feel. Well, it is dependent on a broader population. And if you disagree with the broader population, I think that's ultimately why we don't really have concepts of like morally right or wrong, because it is dependent. It is to some extent dependent on what people feel, which is different across people.
So okay, maybe to build off of this, I would first of all
just really quick. I realized I was parodying Jake to an extent, but to make a point, which is that secular notions of goodness are completely meaningless, in my opinion. Just as you might view this idea that goodness, truly defined, just is God himself, I find the idea most secular definitions of good meaningless because they don't think it exists.
No, well, okay, I think it exists descriptively, and I think that you'd have a tendency to trivialize feelings. I think everything we do in life, from taking a nap to trying to join the army to rescue Holocaust victims, like all of these things are just motivated by feelings. So to use just is really like a misnomer. Feelings are profound. They are everything from like I stubbed my toe at the like superficial level to like my parent just died, I am grieving. And to say it's just a feeling is to say that my parent just died, I am grieving is not like an important contributing factor in your motivation. That is all there is. Like that is the depths of human emotion are profound and not to be trivialized. So I would say it's not just a feeling. And I would
I said I was parodying you. I know you wouldn't say that.
I would also build on what Tyler Beck said by pointing out that this is, I kind of had two horns in my dilemma. I said, either you're making an empirical claim and you need evidence, in which like you write down, this is what I think good is, which I can't do precisely, but I can give you a pretty good account of in terms of biology, or right. So you can write down that account and then you need to give evidence for why that is empirically true, or you can do it by definition and say, this is my definition of good. This is why, this is why it's true or why it's not true. And in that first horn, it is not my personal observation that there is an objection here with respect to God solving the issue. So Bertrand Russell, in his essay, Why I'm Not a Christian, really put this argument forward very clearly, and it's not very long. So like I would definitely recommend, I think you've probably seen it, Tyler Pedersen, but like it's definitely worth a read for those who haven't seen it. He argues that the notion of good must be what he calls logically anterior to God. All that is to say just that we have to have a notion of good before we say God is all good. Otherwise, it is meaningless to say God is all good. We are saying God is all godlike, which is a tautology. Obviously, it's true. And I think this makes a lot of sense. Like if God or any being were to hand me, to tell me killing is wrong, or hand me a list of morals that like are objectively true, and they weren't in line with my morals, I don't see in what sense they are true. Like in what sense what does it even mean for them to be true if they don't compel me? You might say, well, like they lead to better outcomes, like killing is wrong because, or helping your neighbor is right because in the long term it leads to less suffering in the world. And but then you have to appeal to my more basic value of suffering is wrong. And so again, this is an empirical claim. Does helping your neighbor lead to less suffering in the long term? So like all we can do is make empirical claims about what higher order values help our lower level values. But I don't think it means anything to say God is all good, and just to define that, to define good as godlike, it's a tautology. It's circular. It doesn't mean anything.
I think.
Oh, go ahead.
Sorry. I think it might. This might be a terrible idea, but I think the conversation might be clearer if none of us can use the word good. If Tyler has to use the word godlike, and if we have to use some term that Tyler defines, maybe biologically advantageous or something. Like, it might be clearer because that's basically what we're saying.
And
right?
can we replace God with an omniscient computer?
No. But I just want to say something, though. This is, again, like, how you feel matters, like, deeply. That's why most of us feel it is wrong to lie. Most of us feel it is wrong to do X, murder. Most of us feel that very, very deeply. And that's obviously designed. But the point is, what you feel and what you think can both be wrong at various points. I can say that. Like, I feel comfortable saying, Jake, you could be wrong feeling this way.
Can you tell me what you mean by that?
Yeah, so in the example you give of thought experiment where, like, God comes to you and he tells you that it's actually right to do something that you thought it was wrong to do. And you're saying, well, but nothing in me resonates with what God's telling me. So I'm not going to listen to God because my feelings, my thoughts are God, basically. They tell me how to behave, how to live. So in that case, you are saying nothing could change my mind at the moment until my feelings change, until I have some different set of values.
No, I gave a caveat, right? I said that he might be right in the sense that it leads to a satisfaction of my more basic values in the long term. Yes, that's an empirical. Yeah.
Sure. But am I correct in general that you're saying so long as you feel a certain way about a certain action, it doesn't matter what an all-knowing, all-wise God tells you, because you're the judge. It's your decision. Right.
Yes.
So what I'm saying from my position, I feel, given my ontology, I feel comfortable saying you could be wrong despite your feelings. Your feelings might need to change. Same for myself. My feelings about why might need to change. I'm assuming there's something that could change about me. There could be progress made in the way I view X, Y, and Z. I don't see.
But that depends on your current value of progress. Your value.
Even the idea that there is a progress assumes that there's something right that I should be headed towards, something wrong that I should not be headed towards.
I think this all fits. I think this all fits. It's just that in the biological morality, or whatever you want to call it, like, biology, evolution, whatever, society has produced societal wisdoms that are a reflection of, like, generations of society, and those do get encoded into stories and even, like, idioms that we often know are kind of the wiser choice, but we might not. I think to say, again, I think it is a little bit like reducing it to say, like, oh, I don't feel that way right now, so it's not wrong. But I think that erases, like, a lot of more complicated, subtle things about this, where it's like, I might not feel that way right now, but I might. I think ultimately what Jake might be saying is, like, in the long term, I will be better for having acted that way or not having acted that way. So even if my feelings, disagree with something you tell me right now about morality, like, I think as you get older and maybe, like, your morality develops or you become wiser, you might realize, oh, actually, like, if I had acted differently, I would have felt better about that. And so I think feelings, it's maybe Jake or I haven't phrased it the right way, but I think your critique, I don't fully think it's correct, because I think it's about something that we haven't articulated correctly, which is really like, it's not just your in the moment feelings. It's like it's almost like a societal set of feelings, sort of. That might not be the right description.
Well, if I could build on this for a second, the wisdom that comes with cultural norms and social stories, there might be a moral in a story that says one thing, says X, and maybe if I don't agree with X, if it doesn't impel me, then I think all that really matters is how I feel, what my sensations are and what my profound feelings are. It doesn't matter whether they got there biologically or culturally. Maybe I love capitalism because I grew up in a capitalist society. It doesn't really matter how it got there. All that matters is how it makes me feel at the moment. But that is not to say that I don't have a more profound feeling of like, wow, I really don't like suffering. And I could find out, after fully ascertaining the claim and the consequences of it, that capitalism, I don't necessarily think this is true, but let's say that capitalism leads to great suffering and it cannot be fixed, right? So maybe then that my value of capitalism, has to be thrown out the window. But the only way it makes sense for me to do this is if that will maximize a more basic, more fundamental value that I have, which is to minimize suffering. And if someone came up to me and said, hey, you should change your value to love, communism, but it's not going to decrease the suffering in the world, it's going to make it worse, then I don't think there's anything anyone could tell me that would change my mind. And therefore I do not think there's any sense in which it is true that communism is morally good, right? Like, me fully ascertaining the claim and its consequences and how it maximizes my most fundamental values, there is nothing you can say that will convince me otherwise. And there's nothing you should be able to say that convinced me otherwise. You might say, oh, well, God told you to do X or Y, and so you should have respect for God. But respect for God is something, if I don't find that moral, like if I don't agree with that, then it doesn't convince me of anything. And so I guess just fully ascertaining the claim and its consequences, and how it will impact your most basic values, that is all that matters to me for implication for action.
So that I understand that. I don't think you were conflating two things, but I heard a conflation, but I don't think you were doing it. I think maybe I just made it up. But what I just heard was, I have a set of values, maybe the most fundamental being, I think suffering is wrong, or something like that, something maybe deeper than that I'm not aware of. And if you tell me that X behavior is right, but it doesn't resonate with, my deep values or whatever they are down in the substructure, then I'm just not going to see how it's right. Or right? Is that correct? Is that what you said?
Yeah, I mean, to me, there is no sense in which it is right.
Right, but that's a non sequitur.
There is no useful sense in which it is right. You might say it's right based on this other definition of right I propose, like, godlike, but there's no use for that definition for me. So I'm not going to accept it into my ontology or my vocabulary.
But, so this to me is where you're confusing some things, in my opinion. Or you're not confusing things, you know exactly what you're saying. But to me, this is like, there are errors in thinking here. So you even just modified it. You said, well, there's nothing useful about it being right, to me. So so it's just, to me, what I feel, what I believe, it's not useful. But so are we talking about whether or not there can be an objectively good thing, or are we not? Because it does, if we're not, then what you just said makes perfect sense. Obviously it doesn't matter, but that assumes that there isn't such a thing that could be good. In other words, if you have these deep feelings and I say it's wrong to do X, and you say that doesn't align with my feelings, it doesn't matter to you, as you said, because right now you don't feel like it matters to you. But what if I'm right? Like, what if
I'm saying
wrong?
There can be no sense in which you are right. I'm saying it doesn't make sense. It has
Why?
no implication. Like, there is no sense in which that helps me with my model of the world or what I should do in the world. So it's a useful thing to even talk about.
No. What do you mean by what if I'm right?
Well, so what if when I say it's wrong to kill babies, and Jake is a sociopath who doesn't feel like it's wrong at all, and he continues to kill
I think
babies.
sociopaths need to be. It's a set that is a separate case. We can loop. We
No,
can fold that in.
it's not a separate case.
Okay, it's not a separate case, but I think that complicates the question you're trying to get at.
Okay, so not a sociopath, just someone who kills babies.
Yeah.
And I tell them who exists. Not everyone
Yeah.
who kills people is a sociopath.
Sure.
And I say it's wrong to kill babies. And this person says my fundamental value is how I feel in terms of pleasure, and I get a lot of pleasure from killing.
Yep.
That's my fundamental value. It doesn't matter to me.
Right. No, you could still say that is wrong to kill, but only descriptively. There is no sense in which it is useful for that person, putting aside the pragmatic consequences, which we have agreed does not have a bearing on morality. Putting aside the practical consequences, like he might be put in jail, there is no sense other than descriptive in which killing is wrong for him.
No, but you're smuggling in this last part, for him.
There is no sense in which killing is wrong other than descriptively.
Why?
Because why should he say, oh yeah, you're right, killing is wrong? That's a useful concept for me. I think killing is wrong.
Well, why should he?
Yes.
He should, because there's a God who made him and who made all of the people he's killing.
But he doesn't believe that he should do what God wants him to do. He gets pleasure in doing what God doesn't want him to do.
That's my point, though. His values are wrong. His values are
Your
wrong.
values can't be wrong.
Yeah, they can if there's a God who's
no. I mean, we literally define these terms differently, so I think that's where the problem. Tyler defines values as godlike, and we define values as what people feel and what helps them get the outcomes.
No, but no, this is incorrect. This is not correct.
Okay, hold on, Tyler. I could imagine. So maybe to elaborate on your point, I could imagine someone I consider contemptible and going up to them and saying, "Hey, your values are wrong. All I mean by this is either they are not in line with my values, and so I think this person is going to harm me and society, or they are not in line with their more basic values, and their strategy for life is really bad because they're going to wind up depressed and suffering." That is the only two things I could mean by that. What else? You think I could mean they're not godlike, but that's not a useful concept to me.
No, but that's the point. That's the point. Your two explanations you gave are just atheistic explanations. So that's the point. The point is you're just saying the only things that could convince me are the things I already believe. It's like, well, yeah, duh.
No, I'm saying even if I grant you the existence of God, give me a useful definition of morality and whether I should do something.
But okay, wait. Again,
just give me a useful definition. A useful definition.
You said the only two things you could say to that person are this is bad for society or this is not in line with your fundamental values. You're saying that's the only thing you could say.
Right, because why else would they act differently?
So, but this is so important. You're asking a pragmatic question.
Yeah, give me a definition of good that is not circular and is useful. Otherwise it's just I can define another concept as well that is completely garbage and tell you should it has implications for your actions, but unless you can show me that concept has implications for your actions, you can't just say, well, it's the concept. You have to show me.
No, but Jake, you have not defined useful.
But we could go ahead, fine. I mean, something that leads to outcomes that will that go along with what you want, with what you.
So it's useful for the murderer to continue murdering.
If it will ultimately make them happiest.
Great. Okay, so to me, it's it's interesting. The idea, it's very terrifying to be around a person who thinks that they're just doing God's will when they're acting a certain way. But it's not terrifying to think, oh, there might just be someone over there who doesn't think anything means anything.
Because that doesn't happen. That doesn't happen because
how do we get
frequently happen because people share biology and culture.
They share the same nature, which
and consequences.
Consequences are yes.
Right. So even for people who because they have a different sort of makeup than most of the rest of society and what they feel about how things should be done. For people who don't have that, there's still rules, and so that dissuades them from breaking those kind of societally or biologically agreed upon values.
Okay.
Wait, Tyler, you define useful. You asked me to define useful. I want you to define useful.
Well, my definition of morality has nothing to do with usefulness.
No, but what you can say. Hold on, I have to like think for a second. But would you not agree that it doesn't make sense to you to have a concept that isn't useful? Like,
Oh, I would disagree with that completely.
your definition of use can be, it pleases God, but like you have to give me some reason I should have a concept. No?
That's not my definition of useful.
Okay.
What's yours?
You think we can have unuseful concepts?
Oh, of course.
You think it's good to have unuseful concepts?
Not necessarily.
You think there are some concepts that are not useful but are still worth having?
Maybe. Yeah.
I think they're useful then in some way.
Yeah, I agree. Because that's how you define useful.
Well, you notice I've not said that the concept of God is not useful. I don't think the concept of God is useful. I think that it's very useful for people to believe in God. But God, the fact that God exists is not useful, quote unquote.
No, you can have beliefs that are not useful. But I'm saying in particular concepts and words and language exists only when it is useful. Otherwise it is, that language should be gotten rid of for something less ambiguous.
I think maybe the fundamental point here is that for me, there are things more important than usefulness.
Right, but what if I don't share that belief? What if you come back to me and say, I say there's nothing useful in the morality you're telling me, so I'm not going to do it. And you come back to me and say there's something more important, and then I say back to you, well, I just don't value that more important. To me, it's less important. What are you going to say to me? There's no standard by which you can say I'm right and you're wrong. There's no meta standard. There's no standard by which to judge standards. One person might have a utilitarian morality, one person might have a Kantian morality. Then to argue about which one of those is right or wrong is futile because there's no standard by which to judge moral standards. And then you can appeal to a higher level. You can say, well, what God wants, but then that's another moral standard. And there's no standard by which to judge that moral standard. There's no standard by which to.
How do you know that?
Because you can keep telling me more higher and higher, like implications of like, well, don't you care about this? Well, don't you care about this standard? Don't you care about this? And bring like, popping the question up one level of abstraction. But if I don't care about any of those levels of abstraction, they don't have any implication for me. And so there is no implication for my action, no implication for what I should do, which is all morality is. It's saying what I should do.
Why can't there be an ultimate standard?
If there is ultimate standard that I don't agree with, then in what sense is it ultimate?
It's ultimate in the sense that it doesn't care whether you agree with it or not.
Okay, so there's this ultimate standard floating out there in the ether that disagrees with me, but it's of no use to me and has no implication for my action. And why should I agree that it exists? Like, in what sense does it even exist? So it has no implication on reality. So in what sense does it exist?
That's a conflation. You just said it has no implication for me. Maybe true. Maybe at the moment. But it doesn't follow it has no implication for reality.
At the moment, we're putting aside those issues of predicting the future and planning and what higher level values maximize our lower level values when we follow them in the long-term consequences. We're putting aside like the right now problem. So in the sense of what will actually maximize my most profound value, if something doesn't agree with that, in what sense is it useful to me? In what sense is it real? If it doesn't affect that, in what sense is it objective?
I see this to me, Jake. I think this is not clear on your part. I think. So I could add, for example.
Sorry, go. I totally interrupted.
to the question, like, how do you tell somebody that it's wrong to do something? What impact does it have on them if all I can say is it's just my opinion and there's no usefulness to it for me, right? But so what if somebody says, if you continue to act against this ultimate standard, you will suffer?
I totally said that was, remember, that was a caveat. I said, suffering is a more fundamental value. And if someone says helping your neighbor actually is, if they're right empirically that in the long term it will reduce suffering, then I should should in the sense of like it will help the maximization of my utility in the long term, then it makes sense for me to adopt that as a value.
So what convinces you is the utility of the thing. You don't care if it's true or not.
There has to be some recourse to a more fundamental value. So I don't think there is a truth of the matter other than descriptive. So it's not like I don't care about truth. There is no truth of the matter other than descriptively or empirically which values of mine it will satisfy in the long term.
We're going to keep talking past each other because we literally can't agree on the very fundamental topic of this conversation. What is a morality?
But more than that,
Jake and I think it's what people should do, and Tyler thinks it is what God is.
Tyler thinks they're the same thing.
Right.
No, but you have to pick one. You have to define it one way.
No, you don't.
You have to pick one definition and then show it is equivalent to the other. Otherwise, you are saying something hollow.
I can say the same thing for you guys.
No, we're not equating anything. We're saying what people should do is based on these empirical things. What you're saying what people should do is based on what people should do because it's what people should do because God is what people should do because God is God.
No,
we're saying there are these two separate concepts, and you're saying there are these two concepts and they're really the same. And you have to give some proof for them being the same.
You have not said why people should do X, Y, Z. You've not said that.
Yeah, no, but we're not on that. We're not on why people should do it. We're saying, what is it? Morality is what people should do.
No, but wait. You never asked me what morality is.
What is morality?
You never asked me.
I'm asking you right now. I'm asking you right now. What is morality?
You asked me what is goodness.
Isn't morality like goodness in action?
No.
What is morality?
No. But you acknowledge that? You never asked me what is morality.
Sure. I'm now making some conflation. I'm going to ask you right now. What is morality?
Morality describes human ethical behavior.
This is like, are you in our camp now?
No.
I didn't hear the word God. It was very human-centric.
Don't need God to describe what morality is in one sense.
Okay, so you think what you should do?
Different question.
What you should do is not the same as morality, Tyler.
What?
You think what you should do is not the same as morality?
No, I don't. No.
Okay, that's fine. You just think so. Our descriptive concept is what Tyler would call morality. What you should do is, people trying is, well, the objectively correct morality.
So, morality describes human ethical behavior.
Okay. Is there a correct set of morals?
Yes.
And there are also human behaviors that do not follow this correct set of morals.
Yes.
Right.
Well,
so this
not sets. There are human behaviors which are immoral.
Right.
When should human behavior not follow the set of ethical human behavior, or whatever you described to define morality as?
In like what's commonly practiced?
No. Jake and I are defining morality, I think, as what you should do, what people feel like they should do. Or sorry, no, you're right. That is different. What morality is, what you should do.
Okay.
You defined it as ethical human behavior.
No, I didn't.
You said morality describes ethical human behavior. So that's not what is
meaning human behavior in the realm of ethics.
All right, this is taking us down a rabbit hole.
Well, no, we need to get to the bottom of this because I think we're going to keep talking past each other.
So to listen to jazz is not a moral question.
But you should do it?
No. Well, yes, but no.
You need to give me an example of, I think, when are these two things are they ever not the same? That you should or shouldn't do something and it is ethical behavior.
No, so you included should or shouldn't.
Yeah.
So in other words, morality for me is like defined what is morality. Morality is a description of human ethical behavior, whether right or wrong. So I'm not saying, like, if you ask me what is moral behavior, to me that's different. What is morality is, what are we talking about when we're talking about
Okay.
Tyler's
morality?
just saying morality is the common
I'm trying to make it
morality.
simpler to like talk about. But yes, if I were to write down the definition, I would say it is not quote what you should do end quote. It's like a nuanced set of things that describe, yeah, maybe closer to what you said. But what I'm trying to say is get rid of all the endings of morals, morality, moral behavior. Just the core of it. Morality is, or a moral action in a given case, maybe is the better word, better phrase, is what you should do.
Yes.
What does
Do you
should
agree
mean
with that?
in that context?
Wait.
Okay.
Tyler agreed.
Yes,
What
but
does
it's
should mean in that context?
right. That's the key question. But I agree that a moral behavior is the behavior you should do. I would not say the behavior you should do is the behavior that you feel is useful, bar none, or
Right.
that you feel
Right.
makes you feel good on its own, or that makes you feel good and is useful to yourself on their own. I would say that in order for an action to be moral, it has to be an action that you are compelled to do. In other words, you are breaching something in not doing a certain moral action. It is not simply a matter of you choosing a less wise course of action, though the immoral choice is the unwise choice. It is a matter of you not doing something that you ought to do, something that you are compelled to do. The reasons for your compulsion on a subjective basis may be myriad, and they may be distinct from individual to individual. So in Tyler's case, not murdering, he might feel compelled not to murder because the idea of going to jail is like unbearable. That might be the primary motivating factor. I'm not saying this. In Jake's case, it might be just the idea of it repulses him on some like more basic visceral level. But the question is, what should you be compelled to do?
Right.
And
Okay.
in this case, it's not murder. The fundamental reason for you not to murder is that murder is contrary to the nature of the God in whose image you were created. So
And
it's mentally.
why should I care about that?
Because you should care. Well,
Why is
that's
that the right standard?
for a person who doesn't believe in God or care about God. It's like, yeah, you might not care. Like,
there we go.
no, but Jake, that's a different question. You're talking. This is not the same question. On my accounting, I can still say objectively, it's wrong for you to murder because God, which is the ultimate standard, standing above all these other standards and whims and fancies that we might have, says it's wrong to murder.
All you are telling me by that is saying that one of your more fundamental values is to do what God says. And I'm telling you that is not one of my more fundamental values. So what can you say to convince me that I should or shouldn't do something?
Oh, I don't think there is necessarily anything I could say.
And that's the core of it, right? That's all I'm saying, is that to someone who doesn't believe that they should do what God says, that it's not one of their values, there is nothing you can tell me to convince me of an objective morality.
I could try all the things that you might try. So I could say, I could try to get you to see that it goes against your nature to act against God. And you say, well, I don't think there's a God. I could try to show you that it's going to lead for suffering for you in the end. And you say, oh, I don't believe in God. You can multiply the reasons, but you're right. As long as a person persists in holding on to a false idea, they're going to continue to persist in holding on to the false idea. So in the case of a sociopath, just to finish my rant, in the case of a sociopath, there is nothing you could say to the sociopath that would make him think he should stop killing.
Yes.
Okay, so we're in the same boat.
Right. So I think what you're saying is something you could say is your most fundamental value is to do what God, do what his standards are. And what I'm saying is I might have a more fundamental value, something like minimize suffering. And all I'm saying is when these two fundamental values don't agree, there is no objective way to say one is more true than the other. When your most basic values don't agree, there's no sense in which one is true.
So I would agree in a sense. So in a sense that you wouldn't be able to demonstrate. I agree with that. Like, sure.
Yay! We've done it.
No, but
By Jove, we've done it.
I hope you see that that's not actually like a dunk by any stretch of the imagination, because all you've done is told me that there's nothing that could convince you that you're wrong. That's all you've done. And that in the case of morality, people are like that. People are very steadfast and stubborn sometimes in what they believe is morally right and wrong. And there's a very high threshold for what would convince a person.
I'm saying something more than that.
In the sense that over our many years conversing these matters, I've realized that there's nothing I could say that would convince you. Like, yeah, sure. But I still think you're wrong. And like, that's important. Like, if a person holds a view that's wrong, I'm going to tell them I think it's wrong. Like, I can't convince you. Like, I'm fine with that. Like, I'm content simply saying what I think is true, because I think truth is a more fundamental value than usefulness or comportment to my feelings. That's what that's what I think. So like, yeah, I agree. I can't convince you. Like, did you think I was going to tonight?
No. I think in some sense you could convince me, in the sense that like you could show me that like, you know, you could provide me evidence hypothetically that some version of God is real, and then you could show me that like following what he says is generally leads to better outcomes that minimize suffering, and then I could put this on my value hierarchy somewhere. But what I'm saying is like, unless this actually comes to replace like my most bottom level value, it is never like, in more sense, one value hierarchy is never more, actually put aside the hierarchy because some hierarchies can be inconsistent. The most basic value in your hierarchy, there is no sense in which one is more true than another one. So you could say my most basic value is doing what God says, and I could say mine is minimizing suffering. And if that is your most basic value, there is no sense in which one is more right or wrong than the other, except descriptively, right? Like you could say descriptively, most people have this as their more basic value. And you could say a higher level value tends to actually satisfy a lower level value more often, so they're consistent. But, you know, I think at the end of the day, this is why I was talking about like usefulness before. For you to convince me of anything, like that 2 + 2 = 4, you have to show me that that is a useful concept. And useful means that it like achieves some ends. And if believing something is objectively true, like that, you know, God, your most basic value should be that doing what God says, you have to show me that that's useful for something. In particular, you have to show it's useful for solving something below God on my value hierarchy, more fundamental on my hierarchy of values. And so what I'm saying is, if you don't have something more fundamental, there is nothing you can say to a person to like convince them. And in that sense, there's no such thing as truth in morality, more than descriptively. I would also say that my view of the world is very much, you know, there's this is-ought problem, but finding out about what other people, so that means there is what is physical and real, and about what is physical reality out there in the world, made of material things. And then there is our utility functions or objective functions or reward function or incentive structure or value structure. All those things I lump together as the same thing. And in reinforcement learning, you'd call it the reward function. But there's like this model of the world I have, and there's this reward function. And you might be able to say like certain actions help me to maximize my reward structure or don't help me to. And I think science is useful here because you can find out about other people's reward structures, and you can find out how to actually maximize your reward structure. And I think there's hierarchies in reward structure, but like, unless something is useful in the sense that it helps me maximize my reward, there's no reason for me to even import it as a concept into my vocabulary. So that's all I was trying to say by saying, like, ultimately you have to show me that your definition of good is useful and that it does something helpful with respect to my reward function, my most basic values.
That seems true to me. But again, and we're obviously at an impasse, but I would say that I would agree with everything you said there, I believe, in the sense that, yes, as long as you insist upon setting the values, you will not be convinced by an external norm.
Well, I don't know about that part about insisting, but
as long as you are saying, I decide what's right and wrong, and I don't listen to anyone else if they contravene my feelings, my basic values, yes, you will not be convinced otherwise.
Well, what I'm saying is there's no other reason to do anything, to take any action in the world other than with respect to your value structure. Your value structure is implication for action.
Yeah.
And so unless you give me some like way I can improve a more basic value in my value structure, then we're at
Yeah.
an impasse.
No, we definitely are. I agree with you, but I think the issue is that the values need to change. Your values need to change. I mean, obviously, I'm just asserting that.
What does need mean? Right? Like, what do you mean by my values need to change if they're working fine for me?
So, well, again, assuming they're working.
Well, they're not working fine for you.
They wouldn't actually, in reality, be working fine for you. In the fundamental sense, not in the sense of your immediate suffering, like obviously, but what it means for your values should change is they should align with what's true. And so, insofar
I don't
as
think there is truth about value function, about like your reward function, right? There is no truth about what it, about what the like best reward function is.
But this is another way we disagree. I don't think that values are just reduced to reward function at all.
Well, hold on. I mean, and what I mean by there's no truth about what is the best reward function is that best needs to be defined in terms of a reward function. So you could say it's this reward function, like if you maximize it, it's well aligned with this other reward function. But to me, like saying a reward function is true is meaningless unless you, well, it's just meaningless.
Yeah, this comes down to our like subjective experiences too. Like I process moral actions to a large degree, like when I've done something wrong, how do I feel? As I'm sure you do as well, as we've talked about. But most fundamentally, when I'm reflecting on those feelings, it's not, I think that was wrong because I felt kind of bad about it. Like that's just not, in moral reflection, I recognize in my moral infractions, violations that are significant because they contravene what's beautiful, they contravene what's fundamentally true.
Well, and I do that too, but I have to recognize that's because I value beauty and I value, all those things you're saying I contravene X, Y, and Z. Well, you have to add that you value X, Y, or Z.
No, but they're more fundamental than usefulness.
Well, that's how I would define usefulness. I would say useful is what satisfies your more fundamental values.
You only believe in God because it's useful.
Explain.
It's like in your conception, it's the most accurate way of perceiving the world, and it will, you're living the most in that system. It is going to get you what you want, which is to be God, like act in God's image, right? Or act in the ethical code, which was set forth because of God and whatever. So like, I feel like you only believe these things, or I'm not saying like, I'm not trying to trivialize what you believe, but like ultimately what I'm saying is like, you believe these things or act in these ways because it is useful.
I don't see how though. Like, I mean, I believe that it's useful, but I don't understand how what you just said shows that it's useful. Like,
well, because if you believe in God, it is then no longer useful for you to like act in the way that Jake and I are talking about based on your feelings. It's like the most useful way is to act in accordance with God.
I think we should define usefulness, which we haven't. So I don't understand usefulness. I understand usefulness primarily to be a matter of benefits.
Benefit with respect, but how do you define benefit? I think it comes down to like whether it satisfies your values, right? Which is all I'm using as a proxy for a reward function. Useful is something that will enable you to act in order to satisfy your reward function. Like, anything that helps you take actions in your environment to satisfy your values. But it presupposes values. There's always values. Anytime you take an action, it is because you value something more than something else. You value a different state of affairs of the world more than the current state of affairs of the world.
There we agree 100%. Your definition of usefulness assumes values, for sure.
Yes. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Agree. 100%.
Yeah.
We did it.
There's one last thing I wanted to mention. In my intro summer at Brown philosophy course, we talked about nihilism. And in particular, we said there's generally two canonical reactions to nihilism. There's nihilistic despair, which is that objectively nothing matters. And there's nihilistic disorientation, which means nothing matters objectively. And I think that the first one, most people don't actually agree with, because like if you think that everything's subjective, then nothing objectively doesn't matter. But you might say like nothing matters objectively, so everything is subjective. Like how should I act in a world where everything is subjective? And I think that can be very disorienting. It can also be freeing in the sense that every person, gets to decide for themselves and they have their own reward function. They get to decide for themselves what is valuable in life, what is their meaning in life, how are they going to set their priorities. And I think culture and myth and stories provide huge valuable insight into what higher level values will act as a good proxy on a day-to-day basis for maximizing our more profound values. But I do think there's kind of this still open question I have, which is in a secular world, like even if you believe in God or believe in a particular religion, if you believe that a secular society is the right one, that the government doesn't force on you any religion, how do we instill the right values in people? How do we set up our school system? How do we set up our culture in order to create the right values for people?
You're still begging the question, because if the right values are God, then you just teach everyone religion.
Well, what I'm saying is, how do we put aside like, objectively true, how do we, there are a set of norms and values we agree on. How do we like easily or most productively agree on these and then put them into our education and our culture?
So I think you also have to assert that there are different values and they are not in alignment with any one specific religion.
Yeah, I'm basically saying, what should is this the role of the humanities, and what form should it take in our secular world? Like, should there be private schools that are basically secular answers to religious schools? Like, religion gives people great meaning and purpose in life. How do we give people that meaning and purpose without being tied to a specific religion? Because I think without religion, people do, like, I definitely see that a lot of people find great meaning in it. And like, more than that, if there isn't a formal structure for it, it's very easy to turn to superstition and new age beliefs and kind of put your faith in maybe even less credit. I'm not sure any of these things are credible, but even less credible systems. So I'm curious to see what both of your answers are for just how we come to a consensus and instill these morals in people.
It's not possible.
I feel like I mean, I think we're going to give very different answers, but I think first of all, no, you're not going to get a society that agrees on principles or values to teach. So then maybe you say, okay, so to your point, like we have schools that teach different values. And then the question is, okay, if we have secular schools, how do they teach values? And I think, I don't know.
I have it's like I like how the last topic is like even harder than the first topic.
Yeah.
Like, but I have a couple thoughts actually, but I'll make them brief though. A lot of the values that are taught in like public schools, for instance, government schools, the schools that we went to, I think it is useful to observe the fact that many of those values are Christian, and that we wouldn't be hearing them if it weren't for the legacy of Christian thought in the Western world in general. So to an extent, I would say we're kind of already doing that, like, or have been doing that. So in other words, the value, the right to privacy, is especially a remnant of Puritan thought, where they were fleeing government tyranny, and they said, God has made each of us as sacred individuals, and our privacy ought not be infringed upon by some bureaucratic body. So that's a value that has roots in Christian thought. Another value that has roots in Christian thought is all people are created equal. That's a value that we all share, even if some of us don't believe people were created. So that's a value that's taught. So there are some very important values that can be taught and have been taught without specific reference to God or anything supernatural. And that works to an extent, obviously, like inculcating the idea that you should respect all people, like regardless of background. That's good. That's very good. And that's, that's taught in secular schools, right? So it seems to work without being specifically tied to any religion or any other religion. But then it gets more difficult because, as we all know, from a person who's maybe more religious, this right to privacy idea has been hijacked to include abortion or to include prostitution or et cetera, et cetera. So within reason, it works, like, to kind of have this nice secular setup. But I think we all probably recognize that the values that maybe you two would want to teach, you can't teach because there are still Christians who are holding on to their antiquated ideas. And the values that I would maybe want to teach, I can't teach because the leftists have taken over the schools, or like whatever, we can parody it however we want. But the point is, like, societies can only last so long without having fun. How do I put it? For societies to endure for like more than 300 years, they need to have a shared upon set of values. And I think it's becoming murkier and murkier what those values are for Americans. And I think probably we'd all agree on that, just given the polarization recently, in recent memory. And so the question you pose is very timely. And I personally am a pessimist. So I think that a society like ours cannot last too much longer. And yeah, I don't think there's a solution. Especially, and this is not bad per se, but it is worth pointing out the fact that pluralization, which comes about and has come about through massive amounts of immigration, for example, introduces new values into society. And those values have power. Sometimes they don't. Sometimes the quote unquote dominant culture has a set of values that persist. One example that you can give is like in countries where there used to be very percentage-wise way less Muslims than there are now. The values of those societies in which there have been massive amounts of immigration from Muslim countries have changed over time to an extent. And that's not good or bad. It's just to say that the more you have different people with different values coming together and trying to have a unified society, the harder it comes. And that's just obvious. Like, that's obvious. Like, if us three tried to start a society, like, I'm sure it would be okay, like, because we share some values, like, and I'm sure we could do it. But then let's say we get Bob in here, and Bob has like totally different set of values, and there's only 4 of us, and Bob's like, no, I want this. And we're like, well, how do we adjudicate this? And then let's say you get 10 more people and they all disagree with Bob. Like, the project of maintaining society gets harder the bigger it becomes, the more powerful it becomes, and the more pluralistic it becomes. That's just common sense. So your question is very important. How do we, in a pluralist society, maintain like cohesion and maintain a set of values that we can all agree on and promulgate those values? And it's very hard. It's very hard to do.
I feel like, can I say 2 quick things? Yeah. I guess first, there's this emphasis that a lot of people place on Judeo-Christian values. And it is true that some of these came via Christianity or via Judaism, but a lot of them existed prior. Like, we don't need the Bible to tell us to take care of the sick, the blind, the fatherless. Like, great apes do this, right? Like, there's an ape leader who came across a childless father and protected him and took him up as his own. Like, I mean, maybe it's good to have these codified, but they're not just the product of Christianity. They existed in prior civilizations. That's the first thing I would say. The second is, you're totally right about like it being hard to adjudicate these things in pluralistic societies. Like, one question that was brought up in the 21 Lessons for the 21st Century by Yuval Noah Harari is immigration. And he talks about how, like, well, first of all, there are a lot of questions to answer when we talk about immigration. Like, is it a right or a favor? And to what extent do immigrants have to assimilate? And how do we measure whether immigrants are assimilating? How do we measure whether the host country is living up to its promises? But kind of underlying a lot of this is also what you said about, like, immigrants or other people have different cultures, and there are just different cultures around the world, and maybe one isn't necessarily better objectively, but they might agree or disagree with the host culture. And if your culture values like tolerance, and for instance another culture doesn't value tolerance, then you can't say like, well, we should admit everyone regardless of their values, because it's self-defeating. Like, if you're saying we value accepting people and someone else doesn't, then clearly you have to value accepting some people and not other people. So it's a really hard question, and I think it is pressing and something that we have to answer more and more as the world becomes more globalized.
Yeah, I agree. I make one final comment, extremely brief, and then maybe you should conclude your show. But my final brief comment would be that I agree with you that people, to an extent, don't need to be taught what's right and wrong. I agree with that because people are made in the image of God, and so they have the law of God written to an extent upon their hearts. But I would ask if you could name me a pre-Christian society which emphasized caring for the poor and the weak and the sick as much as a Christian society has, or a society which thought it was important that we celebrate the poor as much as Christian societies have. I would just ask you to think about if you can name one. And then the other thing I would say is, you're right, but those Judeo-Christian values you heard them because you grew up in the West. Like, these values are not taught in the same way in the East or there. So, and that's just true. That's just objectively true. Like, the idea of the poor being like sacred and especially worthy of our care is a uniquely Christian idea. It just is. So
I guess I have a lot of responses to that, ranging from like there are biological underpinnings that express the same thing in different ways in different cultures. In Judaism, it's expressed by like a focus on, mitzvot or good deeds, and in other cultures, by other means. And I'm no expert on like ancient Sumerian culture to say like they had cared as much for the poor or not. But the other response is also like, the US likes to think of itself as one of the more Christian cultures, particularly in the South, and yet that doesn't really comport with the more secular cultures in Scandinavia caring about the poor way more. So I'm not sure that's the most helpful view of looking at the world today, or the most historical view looking at the past. But I will grant you that some of these things have arisen in our particular history, the way I've learned about them through Christianity. And I just don't know if that's the most helpful way of looking at it.
And the Scandinavian countries, were they ever Christian?
Sure. I don't know enough about like Tibet to say like the Tibetan monks like value caring for the poor X amount more than like a Southern Baptist minister. Like I just I can't make that comparison, but I don't think like any more or any less in general. There's more in common than different.
I'm not asking you to quantify it. I guess I'm just saying for myself, I recognize a unique contribution in Christian thought to the Western world. That's what I would say.
Right, but that doesn't mean that without it, in the Eastern world, there aren't very similar values or equally as.
But it does.
Values.
But it does.
Does it?
Historically speaking, yeah. Prior to the advent of Christian teaching to the effect that the poor should be especially cared for, the sick should be especially cared for. Yeah, they were generally outcast.
I don't know enough to refute that, and
Are
I
you sure
also
like
would say,
Taoism and
why do we
Hindu?
care about that value?
Because it's
Well,
useful.
I find it, I really don't know enough, but I find it kind of hard to believe that like Buddhism and Taoism don't say as much about helping um, the impoverished or destitute to the same extent that Christianity does. And I certainly find it hard to believe that the way it is practiced in this modern world, that Christianity does more for helping those people than the other religions.
Even though Christians give more to charity than any other religious group.
Is that true?
Which charities?
What?
Are they like anti-abortion, anti-gay rights charities?
Oh, like helping the poor charities.
Ah, that's important.
As a proportion, I mean, I'd be totally interested in hearing about that.
For next time.
Yeah.
What's
I find it a little hard to
What's
believe.
next time discussion?
Oh boy, I don't
Well,
have a topic for next time.
I wanted to say one thing that maybe we could talk about next time, or maybe it's really not that interesting, but I thought Jake's question originally, the one we've been talking about, was like actually like what are effective ways to what are effective secular ways to teach value. So like not even like, oh, we don't like we were kind of Tyler and I were taking it as like um we don't think like we'll agree on values, so it doesn't work, but like I think maybe there's an interesting question of like, what if we did, or what if we, set up a school where there were like 50 or 10 people founded the school to have these values, and it's a secular school. How do you effectively instill those values without religion? I think that's an interesting question too. And I was thinking about it a little bit before, but other than like showing people that it makes them feel good, which partially it makes them feel good because of their biology, in my opinion, and partially because of their culture. And of course, their culture was influenced by both their biology and Christianity. But in my mind, Christianity came from biology. So to me, it's all like our morals came from biology. So we basically show people that it fulfills their sort of morality. And that, I don't know how to best do that, but that is an interesting question. Like, is religion / story the best way, or are there other ways of teaching these values in secular ways?
How do we re-engage the disaffected youth?
Next time.
So in this podcast, we cover a lot of ground, and I just wanted to take a second to summarize some of the main highlights. We discuss how a secular society inculcates morality. We discuss in what sense religions can be true. Are they more than useful memes? And what are the implications of many mutually inconsistent religions? And we talk about what it means to say your values are wrong. We didn't agree on much, but on this last point, I spent some time making the following argument. First, if an action or moral is not consistent with your most fundamental values, your deepest motivations, then there is no sense in which you should do or believe it. Without an appeal to a more fundamental value, or a practical misunderstanding of the consequences of acting on your value, which shouldn't have an implication on morality, there is no meaningful sense in which a value can be wrong. Thus, there is no objective truth about what you should do, or there is a truth, but then should can only mean something descriptive and nothing more. Second, our descriptive accounts of morality are still immensely useful. Our descriptive accounts of common morality are immensely useful because we are likely to share fundamental values due to biological underpinnings, common biological underpinnings, and because we are social animals who automatically adopt the values of the people we are surrounded by in our culture. A moral can be true with respect to the set of common morals in that it is consistent with them. Additionally, a moral can be descriptively true personally with respect to a deeper value, in the sense that following that higher level moral leads to outcomes that are likely to satisfy the deeper moral. And these profound values are even more likely to be shared. So these two descriptive accounts are why it even makes sense to talk about what you should do. And third, cultural insight into which higher level morals consistently lead to satisfaction of more basic value can likewise be immensely useful. And cultural insight into the shared morality can be immensely useful. In these non-trivial senses, subjective morality, which differs from person to person, can be grounded in something objective. Hope you enjoyed.